The woman holding my dying cat was the woman I walked out on 7 years ago, and she recognized him before she recognized me. Her hands went still on his fur. Miso, 14 years old, struggling to breathe, the cat we had adopted together, was lying on her exam table, and Dr. Imogen Rain was reading his name off the intake form like a sentence being passed. Then she looked up. I watched her understand. I watched 7 years arrive in her face and get put away in under a second, because she was better at composure than I had ever been at courage. "How long has he been breathing like this?" she said. Not a question. A door closing. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe. 2 hours, I said. Maybe 3. He was hiding under the bed, and he never hides under the bed. And when I pulled him out, his sides were going too fast, and his mouth was open, and cats don't breathe through their mouths. I know that much. I know that. I was aware that I was talking too fast and crying while doing it, which is a combination that makes most people look away out of mercy. Imogen did not look away. She had already turned back to Miso, one hand flat and light on his ribcage, counting something with her eyes on the clock behind me. And the part of my brain that was not busy drowning noted that her hands had gotten older in 7 years and were still the steadiest hands I had ever watched do anything. Open mouth breathing, respiratory rate over 80, she said. Not to me. To the tech who had materialized at her elbow, a young woman with a strawberry blonde braid and a badge that said, Poppy. Mucous membranes are muddy. I want him in oxygen now, and I want him handled like glass. No stress, no restraint beyond what the flow-by needs. Poppy lifted the carrier towel around him with a gentleness that made my throat close, and then Miso was gone through a swinging door into the treatment area, and the exam room was suddenly very small and contained only 2 people and 7 years. Imogen looked at the intake form again. Della Novak, she read. Owner. Yes, I said. Miso, she said. Yes. She set the clipboard down on the counter with a care that was its own kind of violence, the way you put something down when the alternative is throwing it. He is in congestive heart failure until proven otherwise, she said. Fluid in or around the lungs. We will confirm with imaging once he is stable enough to tolerate it, which he is not right now. The next few hours matter. I need verbal consent for oxygen, sedation if required, and diuretics. Yes, I said. Whatever he needs, everything. There is an estimate, she said. Someone will bring it to you. I don't care what it costs. Something crossed her face then, fast. A weather system that lived and died in half a second. Most people would have missed it. I had spent 5 years learning her face and 7 years failing to forget it, and I knew exactly what that flicker was. It was a sentence she had decided not to say. She had a whole vocabulary of those. I used to be able to read them through the back of her head. Sit down before you fall down, she said, and left through the swinging door, and that was the entire reunion. 14 words about my body, none of them tender, all of them accurate, because my legs quit the moment the door stopped swinging, and I sat down hard on the bench, with my empty carrier on my lap, like a woman holding a door to a house that had already burned down. The clinic was called Lakeshore Veterinary Emergency and Specialty, and it smelled the way those places smell at 9 at night. Antiseptic and cold coffee and wet dog, and underneath it something older, the smell of linoleum that has been mopped 10,000 times. Somewhere behind the wall, I could hear the oxygen concentrator running, a low mechanical breathing that I would come to know very well over the following 2 weeks, and a monitor beeping in a rhythm I told myself was steady. I had not known she worked here. That is the first thing you need to understand. I had been back in this city for 2 years, and I had done the math 100 times, the odds of a place this size, and I had chosen my groceries and my gym and my coffee with the algebra of avoidance, and it had worked. And then my cat started dying on a Tuesday, and the only emergency animal hospital on my side of the lake had her name on the door in letters I did not read on my way in, because I was carrying 14 years of my life in a plastic box, and he was making a sound I will hear for the rest of my days. I walked into the vet crying with my dying cat. The vet was the woman I walked out on. If you had told me that morning, I would have laughed. By midnight, I could not remember what my life had felt like before it was true. Here is what I owe you before this goes any further, because this is not a story where the wronged woman walks in out of the rain. I am not the wronged woman. I am the one who did it. 7 years ago, Imogen Rain and I were engaged. We had a date, a venue deposit, a guest list argument we had both enjoyed losing, and a cat. We had met when she was in vet school and I was shooting portraits out of a studio the size of a closet, and we had built the kind of life that looks unremarkable from the outside and is actually the whole point of being alive. She worked impossible hours through her internship and her residency, and came home smelling like this building smells, and I photographed weddings on the weekends, and hated myself a little more at each one, and Miso slept in the exact center of the bed like a border dispute, and we were happy. That is the unforgivable part. We were happy. And then a contract came from a studio across the country. The kind of offer I had been telling myself for years was the thing I was waiting for. And Imogen said, "We will figure it out. We always figure it out." And something in me looked at her steadiness. Her terrible, reliable steadiness. The way she loved me like a load-bearing wall. And panicked. Not about her. About being known that completely for the rest of my life. About the fact that she had never once flinched at me, and someday I was going to give her a reason to, and I could not live waiting for it. So I did the flinching for both of us. I left on a night she was working an overnight emergency rotation. I packed while she was saving somebody's dog. I wrote a note that I am not going to dignify by quoting, because there is no version of that note that survives being said out loud, and I put my ring on top of it, and I took the cat. I took the cat. She came home at 7 in the morning to a note, a ring, and half a closet, and no miso. And I know this only because her sister sent me one message, exactly one, 3 weeks later, that said, "You could have left her the cat," and then blocked me on everything. For 7 years that sentence had lived under my sternum like a swallowed pin. And now the cat I took was in her oxygen unit, dying of a heart that had loved us both, and she was the only person on this side of the lake with the hands to save him. Poppy came out at 11 with a clipboard and the estimate and the careful voice they teach them. "He's more comfortable," she said. "Doctor, Rain got the first dose of diuretic in and his rate is coming down. He's a very sweet old man. He let me take his blood pressure like he'd done it 100 times. He's done everything 100 times, I said. He's 14. She smiled at me the way 24 smiles, at grief it hasn't had yet, and then, because she was better at her job than her age had any right to be, she added, "For what it's worth, 14 with a heart like his is not a sentence. It's a negotiation." And he strikes me as a cat who has never lost one. It was the kindest, useful thing anyone said to me that night, and I have never forgotten that she was the one who said it. "We'll call you if anything changes overnight. You can call any hour. Truly any hour. Someone always answers." "Is she staying?" I asked, and heard the question arrive in the room before I could stop it. Poppy blinked. "Doctor, Rain's shift ends at midnight," she said carefully. I signed the estimate without reading the number. I drove home to an apartment that had never felt empty before because it had always had a cat in it, and I sat on the floor next to his food bowl, and at 2 in the morning I called the number, and a night tech told me he was resting. Oxygen dependent, but resting, and I said thank you, and did not sleep. At 6:40 in the morning the phone rang, and my whole body went to ice before I answered it. "He's stable," Imogen said. I hadn't known it would be her voice. It took me a second to be able to use mine. "You're there," I said. "Your shift ended at midnight." A pause. In 7 years I had forgotten the exact texture of her pauses, and it all came back in 1 second, the way she left silence lying in a room like an instrument on a tray, deliberate, sterile, ready. "His pressures were labile until about 4, she said, which was not an answer and was the only answer I was going to get. "We repeated films an hour ago. There's fluid around the lungs as well as in them." I tapped his chest and pulled off 110 milliliters, and he is breathing much better. "He ate this morning. A little. Tuna, not the cardiac diet, before you ask. We negotiate with our elderly gentlemen." She said the last part in the voice she used with clients, warm and practiced. And I understood that she had forgotten for one sentence who she was talking to, and I heard the moment she remembered, because the warmth shut like a valve. "Visiting is between 10 and 4, she said. "He does better with visitors. Someone can walk you back." "Imogen," I said. "The estimate was signed," she said. "We're within it. 10 and 4, and hung up. And I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and understanding with total clarity that she had stayed 6 hours past the end of her shift, unpaid, all night, with the cat I took from her, and that she would rather have her hands ache than let me thank her for it. The oxygen ward was a wall of clear-fronted kennels with ports in the doors, and Miso was in the middle one on a fleece the color of oatmeal, tucked into the loaf shape that cats assume when they are conserving something. When he saw me, his ears came up, and he made the crooked chirp he has made since he was a shelter kitten with a respiratory infection, the sound that made 25-year-old Imogen say, "Oh no," in a voice of total defeat, because we had come to adopt a sensible adult cat and left with him instead. I put my fingers to the port and he pressed his cheek against them, and I sat on the floor of a hospital ward and cried for the second time in 12 hours, quietly this time, with a technique, the way you learn to cry at weddings when you are the photographer. That was how the days took their shape. 10 in the morning, the drive around the lake, the chair they eventually just left beside his kennel because I stopped being a visitor and became a fixture. Miso improved in increments that the whiteboard on his kennel recorded in a handwriting I knew better than my own. Resp rate 44. Ate half a can. Resp rate 36. Off flow by for 20 minutes. Tolerated well. The notes were clinical, and the handwriting was Imogen's, and some of the entries were time-stamped at hours when Imogen was not scheduled to be in the building, and I did not say anything about it because I had learned my first lesson on the phone that morning. She would give him everything and me nothing, and both of those were correct, and I was not going to make her carry my gratitude on top of everything else I had already made her carry. We developed a choreography, she and I. She rounded on him at 11. I learned to arrive at 10 and be composed by then. She spoke to me in updates, precise, complete, delivered standing, with the chart between us like a fence. I asked good questions because I had stayed up reading veterinary cardiology until my eyes burned, and I watched something flicker in her face the first time I asked about his enzyme values. Another sentence not said, and I filled it in myself in the car afterward. "Of course you learned it overnight," is what she did not say. "You were always a quick study. You studied me for 5 years, and passed every test except the only one." The tell, if you want to know it, was her hand on his fur. Everything else about her was seamless. Her voice was level. Her updates were impersonal. She called me Miss Novak in front of the staff with a straight face, and the first time she did it, Poppy's head came up like a deer's, because apparently Dr. Rain called every other owner in the building by their first name. But when she examined Miso, her hand always finished the same way, flat along his side, one slow pass from shoulder to hip, twice, and that was not medicine. I had watched her do that on our couch 1,000 times, with her eyes closed and a journal article open on her chest. Her hands had a memory her face refused to fund. On the 4th day, I met Dr. Anneli Skov, the overnight doctor, a tall Danish woman with a laugh she kept at hospital volume and kind, quick eyes that missed nothing, which I would learn soon enough. She stopped by Miso's kennel while I was there, checked his numbers, called him a gentleman, and said, "He is Imogen's favorite patient in the building, you know." She sat with him 2 nights running. I told her, "Go home, I have him," and she looked at me like I had suggested she leave a limb here for safekeeping. She said it lightly. She was watching me while she said it. I kept my face photographer neutral and said, "He has that effect." And Anneli Skov smiled the smile of a woman filing something away, and moved on to the spaniel in the end kennel. I sat with my fingers at the port and Miso's cheek against them, and let myself remember the day we got him, because hospitals at night make the past feel closer than the parking lot. It had rained. That detail matters to no one but me. We had driven to the shelter in a downpour with a list, an actual written list, because Imogen was a 3rd-year vet student and made lists the way other people made excuses, and the list said adult, short-haired, calm, healthy. We were poor, and busy, and sensible. We were going to be sensible. The shelter had a wall of sensible cats, and at the end of the wall, in a kennel by himself with a laminated card that said respiratory infection, resolving, was a cream and ginger kitten with weepy eyes and a chirp broken in the middle like a hinge. And he took one look at Imogen and pressed his entire small self against the bars and made the sound. "Oh no," Imogen said. "I can still hear the exact pitch of it. Total defeat." A woman watching her own list burst into flames. "He's sick," I said, reading the card. "He's resolving," she said. "Already crouched. Already ruined. There's a difference. Look at his airway posture. He's fighting it correctly." "He's fighting it correctly" is the most romantic thing anyone has ever said in my presence, and I have photographed 400 weddings. We named him Miso in the car because he was the color of soup and he was already 12 minutes into our custody, making everything warmer. He cried the whole ride until Imogen pulled her gray scarf off, one-handed, driving, and pushed it through the carrier door, and the crying stopped like a tap shutting off. He slept on that scarf every car ride for the rest of his life. She never asked for it back. There is a version of this story where that sentence is small. He grew into a cat with opinions about closed doors and a chirp that never healed straight. And he slept in the exact center of our bed for 5 years like a treaty line. And when I left in one night with a car full of my own cowardice, he cried at the on-ramp, and I reached back with one hand at 70 miles an hour and pressed the scarf down around him, and he went quiet. And I drove the rest of the way to my new life, with my hand smelling like her wool, hating myself with a precision I have never since achieved in any other discipline. You are going to want to know where a person learns to do that. I will tell you, because I promised myself at the start of this that I would not perform calm at you either. My father left when I was 9. That is the ordinary sentence, the one that fits on a form. Here is the true one. My father did not leave when I was 9. My father left for 4 years and finished when I was 9. He left in weather systems, in half-second flickers, in the way he stopped looking up when my mother laughed, in the way his suitcase lived by the door for so long that I stopped seeing it, the way you stop hearing a clock. And then one Tuesday the suitcase was gone and so was he, and the thing I remember is not grief. The thing I remember is relief. The waiting was over. The curve had finally come. My mother did not flinch. That is the part that ruined me, if you want the imaging. She absorbed it, standing up, and raised me, and repainted the kitchen, and never once let me see the cost. And I grew up believing 2 things with the whole force of a 9-year-old's arithmetic. 1. That leaving is a thing that is always already happening, long before anyone says so. 2. That the people who do not flinch are the ones who pay the most, quietly, forever, in a currency you never get to see. So, when a woman with the steadiest hands I had ever watched loved me without flinching for 5 years, I did not experience it as safety. I experienced it as a suitcase by the door that I could not find. Somewhere in that apartment, I was certain, the leaving was already happening, and the fact that I could not detect it only proved how good she was. And I lay awake next to her some nights, listening to her breathe, 12 times a minute, slow, unguarded, and thought, I will not survive being left by this one. This one will finish me. I have had 7 years and some very expensive conversations with a therapist named Ruth to arrive at the sentence I could not build at 29, which is this. Nobody in that apartment was leaving except me. I was the suitcase by the door. I had been packing since I was 9 years old, and Imogen Rain was simply the first person who made me want to unpack, and wanting it terrified me more than my father ever had. None of which I understood the night I did it. You never do. Understanding is the bill that arrives after. That night, my best friend Greta let herself into my apartment with soup and sat on my counter while I did not eat it. So, she said, the vet. I had told her the shape of it, not the details. Greta had known me 6 years, which meant she had known me exactly as long as the version of me that existed after. She knew there had been a woman. She knew I did not photograph weddings anymore. She had done the math years ago and been generous enough to never show her work. She's keeping him alive, I said. She stays all night. She won't take a thank you. She calls me Miss Novak. Greta stirred the soup I wasn't eating. And what do you want her to call you? I didn't answer. Della, Greta said. You've been going to that building every day for a week, and I've known you 6 years, and this is the most alive I have ever seen you, and your cat is in an oxygen box, so either grief agrees with you, or you left something in that building 7 years before your cat did. That's not fair, I said. No, she said, unbothered. It's accurate. You keep the 2 words in separate drawers. It's your whole filing system. I had nothing for that. She hugged me before she left, hard, the way she does, and at the door she said, "For the record, whatever you did, you were 29, and whoever she is now, she's not the woman you left. And you're not the woman who left her. You should stop apologizing to people who no longer exist and try the 2 who do." On the 5th day I started bringing coffee. Not for her, for the ward, a tray of it. Because I had been raised to believe you do not enter a building full of people saving what you love with your hands empty, and because Poppy looked like a woman running on vending machine espresso, and the night techs had names now, and it was the only currency in the world Imogen could not refuse on Miso's behalf. I was setting the tray at the treatment desk when Annalie Skov came off her overnight with her coat over her arm, and Imogen came in early with her hair still damp from the rain. And the 3 of us arrived at the same 6 feet of corridor at the same moment, which is the kind of thing hospitals do to people. They stage things. They have no shame. Annalie took a coffee, saluted me with it, and said to Imogen, "Your gentleman ate a full can at 4 and yelled at me for more." I documented the yelling. It's in the chart as clinically significant. Imogen almost smiled. I watched the almost happen. 1 millimeter at the corner of her mouth, there and gone, and I felt it land somewhere under my ribs, with the specific ache of being shown a room in a house you used to own. "Dinner Friday," Annalie said to her. "Easy. The way you say a thing you have said before. That Thai place. You owe me for 2 overnights." And Imogen said, "Maybe," and did not look at me, and looked at me, both. I cannot explain the mechanics of it. Her eyes never moved, and the room rearranged itself anyway. And Annalie Skov, who missed nothing, glanced from Imogen to me, to the coffee tray I had carried in like an apology with handles, and something arrived in her face that was not jealousy, and was not surprise. It was arithmetic, finishing. She took her coffee and her coat, and at the door of the ward she paused next to me, close enough that it was for me alone, and said, kindly, at hospital volume, "I have watched her read 1,000 charts. She reads his twice. Every time. You seem like a woman who is good at noticing things. Notice that." Then she was gone down the corridor, and she never brought up Friday again, not once in all the days after, and that was the whole of her war. She saw the shape of the thing before either of us said a word, and she stepped out of its way with more grace than I had managed in 7 years of running. Imogen was looking at Miso's chart. Reading it, I would have bet the apartment it was the 2nd time. "He hates the carrier," I said, because I had to say something or leave. "When he's well enough to go home, he'll fight it. He always has." "He always did," she said. 4 words, present tense breaking into past tense, the seam between the cat she had known and the cat I had kept showing for 1 second before she smoothed it. And she closed the chart and walked into the ward, and I stood in the corridor with a tray of cooling coffee, understanding that we were not having 1 conversation, we were having 2, and one of them was conducted entirely in tenses. That evening, in the parking lot, I met the sister. I knew her before she said a word. Marta Rain had her sister's economy, and none of her sister's restraint, and she was leaning against a green hatchback 2 spaces from my car with her arms crossed and the specific patience of a woman who had checked the visiting log. She was carrying a casserole dish. That detail undid me a little. She had driven across town to feed her sister, who was working herself past midnight over a cat, and she had waited in a cold parking lot to look at the reason why. "Della Novak," she said. "Marta," I said. "You remember me. You sent me 1 message 7 years ago," I said. "I have it memorized. I could recite it." "Don't," she said. "I know what it says." We stood there. The lot lights buzzed. Somewhere behind the building the oxygen concentrator was breathing for my cat, and somewhere above it her sister was writing numbers on a whiteboard in handwriting I knew better than my own. "I'm not here to perform for you," Marta said. "I'm here to tell you 2 things, and then I'm going to bring my sister a casserole she will eat 1/3 of, and we are going to pretend this conversation was about parking. First thing, she sat up with your cat all night. Twice. She will do it again tonight if his numbers so much as blink. You should know what that costs her, because she will never tell you, and it is not the sleep. She held that building together the year you left. She passed her boards 3 months after you left. Nobody here knows that timeline except me, and now you, and I am giving it to you like a weapon, so be very careful which direction you point it. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wasn't taking. Second thing, Marta said, and here her voice changed, dropped its guardrail, became for one sentence her sister's voice on the phone at 6:40 in the morning. When he comes through this, and she will get him through this, because she does not lose the ones that can be kept, you are going to have a choice about what you do next. And I want you to know that I have spent 7 years hoping I would never see your face again. And I stood in this parking lot tonight and watched you carry coffee in to the night techs and read cardiology in your car for an hour before visiting hours. And I hate that I am saying this, but if you leave her twice, there will not be enough of her composure left to hold anything together, and I will personally make sure every veterinary practice on this side of the lake knows your name. Am I clear? Completely, I said. For what it's worth, which is nothing yet, I'm not going anywhere. It's worth nothing yet, she agreed. Then she picked up her casserole and squared it against her hip and looked at me one more time, and something in her face performed the smallest possible softening. 1 millimeter. A family trait. She kept the venue deposit, Marta said. 7 years. It converts to a credit. They send her an email every January and she never unsubscribes. I have never once asked her why, because I am afraid of the answer. And now I've met the answer in a parking lot, and I need to go feed my sister. She walked into the building. I sat in my car for a long time, with both hands on the wheel, going nowhere, doing the only math that mattered, which was January times 7. On the 6th day, Miso crashed. The phone rang at 1:40 in the morning, and it was Imogen, and she was not supposed to be there, and her voice was not the valve-shut voice. His breathing changed an hour ago, she said. There's more fluid, faster than I'd like. I've tapped him again and started an infusion. He's holding. But Della, I need you to hear me. His heart is very tired. Tonight might turn. If you want to be here, come now, and drive slowly, because the roads are wet, and one emergency is enough. She had called me Della. That was how I knew how bad it was. The clinic at 2 in the morning is a different country. The lobby lights were half down. Poppy let me in, no questions, and walked me back past the surgery suite to the oxygen ward, where the concentrator hummed its one long note, and Miso lay on his oatmeal fleece with a line running to his foreleg, and beside his kennel, on the floor, on a folded moving blanket, sat Dr. Imogen Rain with her back against the wall. Not in scrubs, in jeans and an old gray pullover, her hair down. I had not seen her hair down in 7 years. It undid something in me, the way the smallest detail always carries the whole freight, because Imogen Rain wore her hair up for the world and down for one room in one apartment that no longer existed, and here it was, down, at 2 in the morning, for my cat. She hadn't been on shift at all. She had come in from home. There's a chair, she said, not looking up. I sat on the floor instead, on the other end of the moving blanket, an arm's length between us, because 7 years is exactly the length of an arm. Through the clear door, Miso's sides rose and fell, faster than I wanted, slower than the first night, and his eyes were slit open, and his gaze went between the two of us, with the slow blink he saved for the people who were his. And I watched him decide that the geometry of the room was finally correct, and go to sleep. We sat in the concentrator's hum. She smelled like her house instead of the hospital, cedar and clean wool, and underneath it the same warm note that used to live in the collar of every coat she owned, and I had forgotten it completely and remembered it instantly. The way you remember a language when the plane lands. His pressures are holding, she said quietly, to the kennel. If he stays this way till morning, the odds change. Cats declare themselves at night. It's the worst thing about them. You came in, I said. I was awake, she said. At 1:40 in the morning. The clinic called me. His case is mine. Annalie is on tonight. Her jaw moved, one small flex, the tell arriving on schedule. His case is mine, she said again, flatter, and that was the fence going up. So I looked at the kennel and shut up, and we sat. At some point after 3, without a word, she reached behind her, took the folded coat she'd been leaning on, and put it around my shoulders, because I was shaking, and I had not noticed I was shaking. She did it the way she did everything. Briskly, precisely, no eye contact, a clinical intervention for a measurable symptom, and her hands did not linger, and it was somehow the most intimate thing anyone had done to me in 7 years, being bundled like a patient by a woman who would not look at me, in a room that smelled like her whole vanished life and mine. "Thank you," I said. "You're cold," she said, as if correcting my paperwork. "It's a hospital. We keep it cold." "Imogen." "Don't," she said, very quietly, not unkindly. "Not tonight. Whatever it is, it keeps. It's kept 7 years. It keeps one more night." Miso slept. His breathing eased in fractions. At 5, she checked his rate against her watch, and her hand did the thing, flat along his side, shoulder to hip, twice, and then she stood in one motion and became doctor. Rain on the way up, and said morning rounds would confirm, but she believed he had turned. She was right. He had. Cats declare themselves at night, and he had declared for staying. She walked me to the lobby. The sky over the lake had gone the color of a healing bruise. At the door, I took her coat off my shoulders and held it out, and she took it. And for a moment, we were both holding it, one sleeve each, and neither of us let go, and it was so much like a handoff we had done 1,000 times in a hallway that no longer existed, that I heard myself say it before any better judgment could get a vote. "I looked for a way to say this all week," I said. "There isn't one, so, I'm sorry, not for leaving. People are allowed to leave. For how?" The how was unforgivable, and I've known it every day for 7 years, and I'm sorry. She went very still. The coat hung between us like a body. "You're sorry," she said. "Yes. At my place of work. At 5 in the morning, while your cat is in my oxygen unit. I know. I know how this looks. There was never going to be a right room for it, and I couldn't keep standing in rooms with you, pretending the wrong one didn't exist." Imogen looked at me for a long time. The composure did not crack. I want to be precise about that, because I had spent a week watching for the crack like weather, and it never came. What happened instead was worse. It bent. The whole architecture of her face stayed standing and simply, fractionally, bowed, like a shelf under one book too many, and when she spoke, her voice was level and quiet, and each word had been paid for individually. "You didn't take a job, Della," she said. "You took the note, and you took your ring off, and you took my cat. I came home at 7 in the morning smelling like this building, and I called his name before I saw the closet. Do you understand? Before the note, before the ring, I stood in my own kitchen and called for the cat. I did not look away. It was the only thing I had to offer, and I gave it whole. So no," she said. "You don't get to hand me sorry in my lobby with his chart still open on my desk. Sorry is not a word. Sorry is a length of time. You are 7 years short." She took the coat out of my hand, folded it once over her arm, and held the door for me, because even then, even bowed, her manners were load-bearing. "Recheck in 10 days if he keeps improving," she said. "Dr. Skov can see him, if that's easier." "It is not easier," I said. Something moved behind her eyes. Arriving and being put away, one more sentence declined. 10 days, then, she said, and went back inside, and the door hissed shut on its pneumatic arm. Slow, the way hospital doors close, as if even the building was refusing to give either of us the mercy of a slam. Miso came home on a Thursday, 4 days later. 7 medications, a cardiac diet he regarded as a personal insult, and a discharge appointment that Imogen ran with a resident present, which I understood exactly. A witness, a chaperone, a fence with a person in it. She demonstrated the pilling technique on a stuffed cat with a total absence of humor that was itself a kind of humor, and she told me the numbers to watch, the breathing rate in sleep, the threshold that meant call, the threshold that meant drive, And at the end, she looked at the carrier on the table between us for a moment too long. I followed her eyes, and my stomach dropped through the floor of the building because I knew what she was looking at. Lining the bottom of the carrier, where it had been for 7 years, washed and returned, and washed and returned, so worn its cables had gone soft as felt, was a gray knitted scarf. Her scarf? She had left it in the carrier the week we brought him home from the shelter because he cried on car rides and it stopped him. And when I packed my life into a car in one night while she saved somebody's dog, I had taken the carrier as it was. And then I had kept it as it was. Through 4 apartments and 2 cities and 7 years, I had kept her scarf under my cat and told myself it was for him. Imogen looked at the scarf, then at me. The resident, sensing an atmospheric pressure change with the animal instinct of the very junior, became fascinated by the Sharps container. "That's," I said, and stopped, because there was no end to that sentence that was not the truth. Imogen closed Miso's chart with a soft click. "You kept my scarf in his carrier for 7 years, she said, in the level, paid-for voice, quiet enough that only I would ever own it. "You do not get to tell me you left because you stopped." She picked up the chart and walked out, and the pneumatic door sighed shut behind her, and I stood in the consult room with my hands on the carrier and my heart going like a cat's, 80 a minute, too fast, muddy, drowning. While on the other side of the wall, her footsteps went down the corridor at exactly the pace of a woman who was not going to let herself be heard breaking. I drove home at 19 miles an hour with a 14-year-old cat yelling at me from the passenger seat, and her scarf under him, and her sentence in my chest where the swallowed pin used to be. "You do not get to tell me you left because you stopped." It was not an accusation. That was the terrible part. It was a diagnosis, delivered the way she delivered all of them, after the imaging, after the numbers, with the confidence of a woman who had already tapped the chest and measured what came out. She was right. I had never stopped. I had built an entire second life on top of not stopping, 4 apartments in 2 cities and a career change, and 131 first dates that went nowhere, because every one of them flinched eventually, and I had already used up my lifetime allowance of flinching in one night. And underneath all of it, riding in the bottom of a plastic carrier, the whole time, soft as felt, the proof. Miso walked out into the apartment like a landlord returning from vacation. He inspected the food bowl, the window, the exact center of the bed. He yelled once at the radiator for reasons of policy. Then he climbed onto my chest while I lay on the couch not crying, and put his face into my neck, and breathed, 26 times a minute. I counted. I would be counting for the rest of his life now, and his heart went against my collarbone, with its tired, insistent criminal persistence, and I said out loud, to the ceiling, to the cat, to nobody, all right. 7 years short. Then we start paying. The discharge instructions said to text his sleeping respiratory rate to the clinic every evening for 2 weeks. The clinic, in practice, was her. I knew it was her because the replies came from the main clinic number at 11, at midnight, at 1, long after any front desk on earth has gone home, and because they were composed the way she composed everything. No waste, no door left open. Rate 26, asleep, ate full dinner, I wrote. Good, she wrote. Rate 24, stole tuna water, unrepentant, noted. Rate 28, sleeping on my laptop, warm. Acceptable, 14 nights of that, a courtship of vital signs. I read more into the difference between good and noted and acceptable than I have ever read into any human text in my life, and I was not wrong too, and we both knew it, and neither of us said so. On the 9th night his rate was 40, and climbing, and he was sitting up instead of curled, and I called the clinic with my keys already in my hand, and it was her voice, immediately. No hold music, as if the phone had been lying on her chest. "Tell me the number," she said. 40. 42. He's sitting sternal, he won't settle. Is his mouth open? No. Gums. Pink, I think. It's dark, I didn't want to stress him with the light. Good instinct. Now sit down next to him and stop performing calm and be calm, because he reads you like weather. Give him 1 dose of the extra diuretic, the small syringe, the one I marked with green tape. Then count again in 20 minutes. I'll stay on the line. You'll stay on the line, I repeated. Count, Della. I dosed him. I sat on the bedroom floor next to the bed with the phone on speaker and my hand flat on his side, one slow pass, shoulder to hip, the way her hand did it, because it was the only medicine I had, and on the other end of the line I could hear her kitchen. A kettle, a chair, the specific quiet of a woman sitting down to wait with you from 4 miles across the lake. Neither of us spoke for 20 minutes. It was the longest conversation we'd had in 7 years. 31, I said finally. 30. He's loafing, he's settling. Good, she said, and this time the word had weight in it. Ballast, relief with its collar turned up. Give the second green syringe at 6. If he's over 32, he'll sleep now. Imogen. Yes. Thank you for staying on the line. A pause. Her kettle clicked off, far away, in a kitchen I had never seen. You did well, she said. That was the whole sentence. And then, quieter, in the voice from the oxygen ward floor, the one that arrived only after 3 in the morning, you always did well in an emergency. It was the ordinary days you couldn't survive. She hung up before I could pay for that one. It was fair. I owed. I sat on my bedroom floor until sunrise with my hand on my sleeping cat, taking delivery. The recheck was on a Tuesday. His fluid was stable, his kidney values were holding the line, his heart was enlarged and tired and staying, she said, in the range where old gentlemen live for a good while if their people are diligent, and his person was diligent, she said, to the chart. Not to me, which from her was a medal ceremony. Then I did the thing I had rehearsed 40 times in the car. I took the scarf out of my bag. Washed, dried flat, folded into a square the size of a book. 7 years of Cat had worn it soft as breath. I set it on the exam table between us, next to her stethoscope, and pushed it 1 inch toward her side. This is yours, I said. It has always been yours. I told myself for 7 years I kept it for him, and that was true, and it was also the smaller half of the truth, and I'm done keeping the bigger half in a carrier. So, it's yours. I'm not asking for anything with it. I'm returning stolen property. Imogen looked at the scarf for a long time. Her face did nothing, which by then I understood was her face doing everything. All of it, at once, behind the glass. She picked it up. She turned it over once in her hands, and her thumb found a place along the edge, some flaw in the stitches, some private landmark, and stopped there. I knitted this the winter we met, she said. It was the first thing I ever finished. It's full of mistakes. There's a dropped stitch right here that I used to think about pulling out and never did, because by the time I noticed it, he was already sleeping on it, and fixing it would have meant taking it away from him. She set it back down, and pushed it 1 inch toward my side of the table. He still needs it, she said. That hasn't changed. Then, while I was picking my heart up off the linoleum, she took out her pen and wrote something on the discharge sheet and pushed that across too, and the something was this. Recheck in 1 month, and below it, in the handwriting I knew better than my own, a sentence that had nothing to do with medicine. If it would help his adjustment, I could visit him. Sundays. You would not need to be there. You would not need to be there. I read the sentence 4 times. It was the most Imogen Rain offer ever drafted, generosity engineered to require nothing of anyone, kindness with the door already held open for my exit, and it was also, underneath its clinical grammar, the first crack in 7 years of wall, and we both knew that too, and neither of us said so, because the resident was in the room, and the fence had a person in it, and some conversations are conducted entirely in tenses. Sundays, I said. Yes, he'd like that. So began the strangest season of my life. Every Sunday at 2 I left my own apartment with a list on the counter, feeding notes, medication times, the location of the brush, and walked around the lake for 2 hours while my ex-fiancé visited our cat in my home. And every Sunday at 4 I came back to a building that smelled faintly of cedar and clean wool, a brushed and insufferably smug cat, and a note. The first note said, Rate 24. Took all medications. Yelled at pigeons, rate unaffected. I.R. The second said, Rate 22. He remembers the scarf trick. showed me where you keep the treats by staring at the cabinet until I was ashamed. I.R. The third said, rate 25. He sat in the window for an hour. There is a heron that patrols your reeds at 3 o'clock. He has opinions about it, so do I. It is a very good window. I.R. The fourth note was longer. The fourth note said, rate 23. He slept on my lap for 40 minutes, and I did not move, and my foot is asleep, and I am dictating this in my head long before writing it, which is a thing I do now, apparently. The photograph over your desk. The lake and fog, the one in the gray frame. Is that yours? I.R. I wrote back on the same paper, and left it on the counter for the following Sunday, like a woman leaving grain out for a deer she was trying not to startle. Yes. First morning after I moved back, I got up at 5 and stood on the point in the dark and waited for the light and shot 40 frames and kept one. It was the first photograph I'd taken for myself in 5 years. I stopped shooting weddings, by the way, the year I left. It turns out I could not spend every Saturday watching people promise things. D. The next Sunday's note said, I know. I looked for your name in the credits of things for a year. Weddings, galleries, agencies. Then I made myself stop looking. The fog picture is better than anything you did back then. It looks like it was taken by someone who finally stopped performing calm. I.R. The note after that was 4 lines, and I have it still, in the drawer where important documents live, between his adoption papers and my passport. It said, rate 23. He sat with me through a hard phone call today, the kind I usually take alone in my car. He has a talent for arriving exactly when composure gets expensive. I suspect he learned it somewhere. I.R. I stood in my kitchen holding that note with both hands, and miso wove around my ankles, yelling for a dinner that was not due for an hour, and I laughed and cried at the same time, in the manner of a woman whose filing system had finally collapsed, both drawers open, everything in one pile. Greta came over that night, read the notes without asking, because she is Greta, and laid them out on the counter in order like evidence. You are pen pals, she announced, with your ex-fiancé, through your cat. I'm aware. This is the healthiest either of you has ever behaved, and it's completely deranged. I love it. Don't rush it. Whatever this is, it has a rate, and you of all people should know better than to stress a recovering heart. Which one of us are you talking about? I said. Greta looked at me over her glass, unbothered, accurate. Yes, she said. The notes went on through October, through November. His rate held. Mine did not. Every Sunday at 4, I came home and read her handwriting and learned my own home through her eyes. The heron, the good window, the yellow I had painted the kitchen, which she never mentioned and I knew she had catalogued, because she catalogued everything. Because attention had always been her native language, and I had once mistaken it for a wall when it was the whole house. The first Sunday of December, I came home at 4, and her car was still on the street. I stood on my own doorstep for a full minute, then I went in. She was sitting on my kitchen floor. That is the detail I will keep until I die. Not the couch, not a chair, the floor, her back against my cabinets, legs out, hair down, and miso asleep on her shins on the gray scarf, which she had taken out of the carrier and spread over herself like a picnic blanket. And she looked up when I came in, and did not move. Because the first law of her whole life was that you do not disturb a sleeping patient. And she said, quietly, I meant to leave at 4, he fell asleep at 3. I have been sitting here doing math about how much I was willing to disturb him, and the math kept coming out in his favor. I put my keys down slowly, the way you move in a room where something wild has decided to trust you. Coffee, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. The composure was there, all of it, and behind the glass, everything else, and I watched her make a decision I could not price. Yes, she said. Black. I know how you take it, I said. I know you know, she said, and that was the sound of a door coming off a chain. I made coffee in my yellow kitchen while my cat slept on my ex-fiancé's legs, and then I sat down on the floor across from her, against the oven, a cat length apart, because that was the treaty line and he was holding it, and we talked. For the first time in 7 years and 2 months, with no chart between us, no fence, no resident, no oxygen concentrator keeping time, we talked. She asked what the job had actually been, and I told her. And I told her the truth I had owed her since the note, which is that the job was real and the job was also a getaway car, and that what I ran from was not her and was never her. It was the unbearable steadiness of being loved by someone who did not flinch, and my absolute certainty, bone deep, older than her, older than us, that flinching was coming, that it always came, and that I would rather drive the car off the road myself than sit in the passenger seat waiting for the curve. She listened the way she listened to a chest, completely, without interrupting the sounds. "That is the most honest thing you have ever said to me," she said when I finished. "I know, I've had 7 years to draft it. And do you still believe it?" she said. "That the flinch always comes?" I looked at her, on my kitchen floor, under my cat, holding a coffee I had made correctly without asking. "I believe," I said, "that I spent 7 years proving I was right by being the flinch myself. Which is not the same as being right, it's just arson with extra steps." Something moved through her face then, and it was not the weather system, not the half-second flicker. It stayed. It was the beginning of the bend becoming visible, the shelf bowing in plain sight, and she looked down at Miso and did the hand, flat, shoulder to hip, twice, buying time, and when she spoke, her voice was level and quiet, and cost her by the word. "I looked for you for a year," she said. "I told you that in a note because I could not say it in a room. I'm saying it in a room now. A year. I called the studio that hired you and hung up when the receptionist answered. I drove past your mother's house at Christmas. I kept your negatives, the boxes in the hall closet. I kept them for 4 years, and when I finally gave them away, I gave them to your mother because I could not put your eyes in a dumpster. I wore my hair up for 7 years because you were the one who liked it down, and I could not stand to catch myself in a mirror being someone you liked. And I read your note until it wore soft at the folds. Not because it was good, it was a coward's note, and you know it. But because it was the last thing your hands did in our house, and I am telling you, all of this, in the order I can afford it. So do not interrupt me, because I have exactly enough in the account for one withdrawal." I did not interrupt her. I sat against the oven, with tears going down my face at a steady, sustainable rate, 26 a minute, and took delivery. "The night your cat came in," she said, "I recognized his chirp from the treatment area before I ever saw the chart. Through a wall. Through 7 years. And I stood at the sink with my hands under the water, and I understood that I was about to walk into a room and find out whether you were alive, whether you were married, whether you were happy, and I had 90 seconds to become someone who could survive all 3 answers. And I did it. Because that is the one thing I know how to do. And then I saw you crying over him, and the composure held. It held the entire time, Della, every day, every round, every note, it held." She looked up from the cat, and her eyes were dry and completely undefended, which was worse than tears, which was the whole vault standing open. "It is extremely tired," she said. "That is what I came here to say, and I have been sitting on your floor since 3 o'clock trying to find a clinical way to phrase it, and there isn't one. The composure is tired. I am tired. Holding this door shut for 7 years was the hardest work I have ever done, and I am very good at hard work, and I do not want to do this particular job anymore." The kitchen was quiet. The radiator ticked. On her shins, on the scarf full of her 25-year-old mistakes, our cat breathed 22 times a minute. "Asleep," declared, "staying." I said, "I need to say the terms out loud, because I don't trust either of us with anything unsaid ever again." "Say the terms," she said. "I am not asking to be forgiven. I don't think forgiveness is a door you walk through once. I think it's a rate. I think it's something a heart does over time or doesn't, and I am not entitled to a number. What I'm asking for is the chance to be accountable in person instead of in absentia, slowly, at whatever pace your numbers allow. And I will tell you when I'm afraid instead of packing. That's the core clause, that's the whole contract. Imogen. When I feel the flinch coming, I say it out loud, in the room, to your face, and you get to watch me be a coward in real time instead of finding a note. That's what I have. That's everything I have. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Miso woke, stretched one paw in the air like a signature, and relocated himself to the neutral zone exactly between us. On the floor, on the scarf he dragged with him, a 14-year-old chaperone with a tired heart, resuming his post. Those terms are acceptable, Imogen said. And then, because she was who she was, she added, I have an amendment. Go. The same clause binds me, she said. When I feel the wall going up, I say it out loud. In the room, to your face. You are not the only one in this kitchen who builds structures instead of sentences. Accepted, I said. We did not touch that night. I want that on the record, because everything after depends on it. She got up off my floor at 7, and her foot really was asleep, and she swore at it in the doorway with her hair down like a completely ordinary woman, and Miso yelled at her for leaving, and at the door she paused, and looked back at the kitchen, the yellow, the window, the cat, me, all of it, one slow pass, shoulder to hip. Rate 22, she said. All parties, continue current management, recheck Sunday. And she went home, and I stood in my kitchen laughing with my hand over my mouth, alone, at a joke 7 years in the making, delivered dry, at hospital volume, by the only person on earth who could ever land it. The following Saturday, I drove 2 hours to my mother's house, because there was a sentence from the kitchen floor I could not put down. I kept your negatives for 4 years, and when I finally gave them away, I gave them to your mother. My mother had never mentioned it. 7 years. 2 Christmases a year, 100 phone calls, and she had never once mentioned it. And when I asked her, standing in her repainted kitchen, she dried her hands on a towel with great deliberation and said, she asked me not to. And she asked so little, and had been given so little, that I decided honoring it was the least this family owed her. They're in the cedar closet, top shelf. I check them for damp every spring. 3 boxes. Archival boxes, the good kind, the kind you buy on purpose, not the kind things end up in. I took them down and sat on the floor of my mother's guest room and opened the first one, and stopped breathing for a while. She had labeled everything. Every roll, every sleeve, every contact sheet, dated and captioned in the handwriting I knew better than my own. Not just organized, curated. Harbor Series, March, overexposed, but she liked the 3rd frame. The wedding she second shot in the rain, the one where the power failed. Rolls 1 through 4, the winter she was learning the medium format camera and swearing at it. And in the 3rd box, in a sleeve by itself, a single contact sheet labeled, the Fog series she never finished. She said the light only happens 12 mornings a year. Someone should make sure she finishes it. 4 years she had kept these. While I was on the other side of the country, losing my nerve at 131 dinners, she had been checking my negatives for damp and writing captions for an audience of nobody, and then she had packed up the evidence of my eyes and driven it 2 hours to my mother, a woman she had every right to never see again, and asked for silence as her only payment. My mother stood in the doorway watching me read. She stayed for tea, she said. That day. 4 years ago. She sat where you're sitting and drank 2 cups and told me the boxes needed to stay cool and dry, and I asked her how she was, and she said, functional, thank you, which I believe is the saddest word I have ever heard a human being use in this house. And then she washed her own cup and left, and I stood at that window and watched her sit in her car in my driveway for 11 minutes before she drove away. And I have wanted to tell you that for 4 years, and she asked me not to, so I am telling you now, because I checked, and the embargo has lifted. How do you know it's lifted? I said. My mother looked at me the way mothers look when they have been reading the imaging longer than anyone. Because you drove 2 hours on a Saturday, she said, and your hands are shaking, and you haven't asked me a single question about the cat. I drove home with 3 boxes on the back seat where the carrier usually rode. The next morning I got up at 5 and stood on the point in the dark, in the cold, in the 12 mornings a year light, and I finished the Fog series, 40 frames. I kept 6. I printed one, The best one, the one where the light comes off the water like a held breath finally let go, and the following Sunday I put it in her hands, with no framing, no speech, no card, just the print and the caption I had written on the back in my own handwriting, which said, "Finished. You were right. Someone made sure." Imogen looked at it for a long time, long enough that Miso got bored and left. And then she did something I had never seen her do in 14 years of knowing her, on and off, at my best and at my absolute worst. She held a piece of paper against her chest, both hands flat over it, the way you hold pressure on a wound, and closed her eyes, and stood in my kitchen breathing, 12 times a minute, slow, unguarded, while I watched the steadiest hands I had ever known decide it was finally safe to shake. "It hangs in her hallway now." She framed it herself. "Badly," she says. "The corners aren't square," she says. "Nobody is fixing it." The Sundays changed after that. I stopped leaving. We overlapped an hour, then two, then the walk around the lake happened with both of us on it, while Greta cat sat and pretended this was a burden. Winter came down on the water. Imogen told me about the years I had missed in the order she could afford them, her father's funeral, the residency she almost quit, the board exam she took on no sleep because a parvo litter did not care about her schedule, Annalie, who had been 2 dinners and a kindness, and had folded her own hand at that treatment desk with the grace of a woman who could read imaging. I told her about mine, the city that never fit, the 131 first dates, the morning on the point in the fog, when I stood in the dark, waiting for light, and understood I had moved back across the country to be 4 miles from a door I was too much of a coward to knock on, and had brought a cat as a cover story, and had needed the cat to nearly die to blow my cover. "He planned this," Imogen said, deadpan, watching him supervise the heron. 14 years of surveillance and then one perfectly timed cardiac event. "He should bill you." "He takes payment in tuna water?" I said. "We have an arrangement." In late December, Marta invited us to dinner. The invitation came through Imogen, relayed at my counter in the tone of a woman reading a subpoena. "My sister requests the pleasure," she said. "I want to be clear that you can decline. I want to be equally clear that she will interpret a decline as evidence, and that I would rather present the case in person." We presented the case in person. Marta's house smelled like garlic and had a green hatchback in the driveway, and 2 children who were told to say hello and then vanished upstairs like weather, and Marta stood in her doorway and looked at me for 3 full seconds before she stepped aside, which in the Rain family dialect was an embrace. Dinner was good, and the first 40 minutes of it were a hostage negotiation. Marta asked about my work with the courtesy of a border official. I answered like a woman with nothing in her luggage. Imogen sat between us, performing calm so hard that under the table, where only I could reach, I put my hand over hers, briefly, once, clause 1 without the words, and felt her turn her hand over and hold on. It was the children who broke it, the way children do, by arriving loudly with a phone to show Aunt Immy a video of a cat playing a keyboard, and Imogen watched it with the total attention she brought to imaging, and pronounced it derivative. Our gentleman has better timing. And produced her own phone, and there, unbelievably, was a camera roll of Miso. Dozens of him. Sunday after Sunday. Miso at the window. Miso outraged at the heron. Miso asleep on her legs with his tongue out, time-stamped across 4 months, and her niece scrolled through them saying his name is Miso like it was the funniest syllable in the language, and Marta looked at the phone, and then at her sister's face while her sister looked at the phone, and then at me. And I watched Imogen's older sister put down 7 years in the middle of her own dinner table, quietly, the way their whole family put things down, with a care that was its own kind of surrender. "Help me with the plates," she said to me. In the kitchen she washed and I dried, and neither of us performed anything, and at the end she wrung the cloth out and said, without turning around, "In January she gets an email from the venue. I told you that once as a threat. I'm telling you now as logistics. 7 years of credit doesn't convert to nothing, and my sister has never in her life been able to throw away something that still worked." She hung the cloth on its hook, straight, square. "That's all," she said. "There's pie." There was pie. We drove home around the lake with the windows cracked to the cold, and Imogen said, "She likes you," And I said, "She threatened me in a parking lot in October," and Imogen said, "Yes, that's what I said." And we laughed the whole way past the point. Both of us, unguarded, at hospital volume, and then well above it. And if you had passed us on that road, you would have seen two women in a car laughing at absolutely nothing, which is to say at 7 years, which is to say at how close they had come to never getting to. In the second week of January, at 1:10 in the morning, his rhythm stumbled. I know the exact minute because I was awake. And I was awake because he had gotten up twice and resettled twice, which he never did. And the third time, he sat sternal on the foot of the bed with his eyes wide and his sides going wrong. Not fast, wrong. A hitch in the meter of him, a skipped beat I could feel through the mattress the way you feel a train change tracks. I counted. I lost count. I counted again with my hand on his side and felt his heart trip, run, trip. I called her cell, not the clinic. She answered on the second ring, awake in the way she came awake, all at once, no threshold. "Tell me," she said. I told her. "The resettling, the posture, the hitch." "I'm losing the count," I said. "It's not the rate. The rate is 30. It's the rhythm. It's tripping." "Is he open mouth?" "No." "Can he stand?" "Yes." "He's angry about the stethoscope app I tried to use, if that helps." "It helps enormously," she said, and I heard, on her end, a zipper, a bag, keys. "Give me 11 minutes," she said. "Do not drive him. The cold and the carrier will cost more than they buy. Sit with him. Count what you can. If anything changes to open mouth, call me and I will talk you through it from the car." She made it in 9. I opened the door to Snow, coming down slantwise, and Dr. Imogen Rain, on my doormat at 1 in the morning, in her coat over what were unmistakably pajamas, her bag in one hand, her hair down and full of weather, and there was a version of me that noted the perfect symmetry of it. The medical bag, the midnight, the hotel of it all inverted, she who had once been walked out on now walking in, and there was another version of me that simply stepped aside, because the first law of both our lives that winter was the cat. She sat on my bedroom floor in her coat and listened to his chest for a long time, moving the stethoscope in the small patient increments of a woman reading a difficult page, and Miso, who bit veterinarians on principle, stood for all of it with his tail wrapped around her wrist like a blood pressure cuff. "Arrhythmia," she said finally. "New. Not fast enough to be the dangerous kind tonight, and his color is good and his lungs are dry. I'm adjusting one medication and we are doing an ECG tomorrow, today, at open. But he does not need the hospital tonight. He needs quiet and warmth, and for his people not to perform calm at him." "His people," I said. She looked up, caught it, kept it. "Figure of speech," she said, in the tone of a woman filing a document she had no intention of shredding. She stayed 2 hours, to be sure. We sat on the bedroom floor against the foot of the bed, the lamp low, the snow ticking at the window, and Miso, medicated and offended and warm, slept between us on the scarf, and at some point her shoulder was against my shoulder, and neither of us moved. And it was nothing. It was 6 square inches of wool pullover, and it was everything. It was the entire nervous system of 2 women routed through one seam. "You should sleep," she said at 3. "He's steady. Listen, even as a metronome." "You could stay," I said. I set it into the lamplight, carefully, no weight on it, a door propped and not pushed. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood and gathered her bag, and at the bedroom door, she stopped and turned around and gave it to me straight, at 3 in the morning, in her pajamas, with her hair full of melted snow. "Yes," she said, "I could. That's exactly why I'm not going to, because tonight it would be about fear, his and yours and mine, and I have already done the version of us that runs on fear. I did 7 years of it alone, and I am not enrolling us in a second term. When I stay, and I am saying when, Della, not if, it is going to be on a night when nothing is wrong. When it isn't about him, and it isn't about a crisis, and neither of us is counting anything. You will know the night. I will state it in the room." "Clause 2, I said, when I could. "Clause 2, she said, witnessed. "Lock the door behind me." I locked the door behind her, and stood with my hand flat on it, one slow pass, and listened to her car start in the snow, and understood that I had just been shown the difference between a wall and a boundary by the woman I had once mistaken for the former, and that I was in love in a way that had a rate, and the rate was climbing, and for the first time in my life I was not going to run from the count. The ECG the next morning was reassuring. The medication change held. Greta, receiving the full report over dinner, put down her fork, pointed it at me, and said, "She drove through a snowstorm in her pajamas, fixed your cat, declined your bed on ethical grounds, and pre-announced the night she intends to accept it. Della, marry her. I have literally seen you cry over women who couldn't commit to a brunch." "I'm working on the prerequisites," I said. "Work faster," Greta said. "You're both over 35, and that cat is not going to chaperone forever." In January, on an evening that was not a Sunday and had no clinical justification whatsoever, she knocked on my door with snow in her hair and a bottle of wine, and her composure worn openly, like a coat unbuttoned, and said, "It's not about him. I want that stated for the record. Tonight is not about the cat. Nothing is wrong. Nobody is counting anything. This is the night. Clause 2, stated in the room." "Witnessed," I said, when my voice came back, and let her in. We ate at my kitchen table like people. We talked about nothing important, which, after 4 months of talking about everything important, felt like a luxury beyond pricing, and Miso sat on the third chair like a maiden aunt, and the radiator ticked, and the snow came down over the lake, and at some point after 10, she went quiet, and I looked up, and she was watching me with the look I had been failing to photograph in my memory for 7 years, the one from the couch, from the early mornings, from the hallway that no longer existed. Total attention, the whole instrument, and no glass in front of it at all. "Clause 1, I said quietly. "I'm afraid." "Clause 1, she said. "So am I." "Stating it in the room," I said. "Stated," she said. "Witnessed." And then she stood up and crossed my kitchen the way she crossed every room, economically, no waste, one clean line, and she stopped inside the length of an arm, inside 7 years, and lifted her hand and touched my jaw. Just my jaw. Her thumb along the bone, her fingers cool from the wine glass, warm underneath, the steadiest hands I had ever watched do anything, trembling, very slightly. At last, where only I would ever feel it. "You came back to the city," she said quietly, close enough that the words arrived warm, 2 years before the cat got sick. "I'm going to need you to say why, out loud, in the room." "For this," I said. "I came back for this. I was just 7 years short to knock." Then she kissed me, or I kissed her. The record is disputed and the parties have agreed to leave it so. It was not frantic. It was worse. It was patient. It was a kiss with 14 years of provenance and 7 years of interest compounded nightly, slow and unhurried. Her hand still at my jaw, steady as it had ever been over any heart, and the kitchen tilted, and the wine went cold. And the snow filled up the window, and somewhere behind us the cat yelled once, at the pigeons, at the heron, at the sheer administrative disorder of it all, and was ignored by both of his people for the first time in his long and well-documented life. She stayed. I will tell you what staying looked like, because in our case it looked like this. 2 women on one couch, talking until nearly 4 in the morning, about nothing, about everything, about the guest list argument we had both enjoyed losing, her feet eventually in my lap like a document being filed after 7 years in dispute, and then both of us asleep sitting up like commuters, and a cat installed between us on the scarf, supervising. The morning looked like her gray pullover folded on my chair with a precision no one asked for. It looked like 2 coffee cups, one black, on the counter beside 4 months of Sunday notes I had never thrown away, and her reading them, all of them, her own handwriting, with an expression I had also never managed to photograph. The composure, and the feeling underneath it finally in the same frame, holding hands. It looked like her hair down in my yellow kitchen, in the 8 o'clock winter light, and a 14-year-old cat asleep between our chairs on a scarf full of dropped stitches nobody was ever going to fix, because fixing them would mean taking it away from him. And it looked like her checking his rate out of pure ceremony, hand flat, shoulder to hip, twice. 22, she said. Asleep. All parties stable. Noted, I said. Acceptable, she said, and drank her coffee, and looked out my good window at her heron. His recheck in March fell on a Tuesday. We drove around the lake together, one car, his carrier on the back seat with the scarf in it, and he yelled the whole way out of tradition rather than distress, and in the lobby of Lakeshore Veterinary Emergency and Specialty, in front of the front desk and the waiting room, and a Labrador with a cone, and God, and everyone. Doctor. Imogen Rain took the carrier from my hand, and then, having a free hand, took my hand, and did not let go of either. Poppy saw it first. Poppy's whole face did something magnificent and unprofessional, and then reassembled itself at hospital volume, and she said, brightly, to the room, to the chart, to history, Miso Novak Rane, room 2, and neither of us corrected the chart, then or ever, and if you look at his file today, that is the name on it, amended in her handwriting, dated that Tuesday, which is as close as either of us has come so far to filing the other paperwork, though the venue, I am told, still exists. Anneli passed us in the corridor with a coffee, and read the imaging in one glance, the hands, the chart, the name, and she smiled the smile of a woman whose arithmetic had come out exactly as projected, and said, walking backward, to Imogen, you owe me a dinner from October, and bring her, and was gone through the swinging door before either of us could pay. His heart is still enlarged. It is still tired. He is still staying. He sleeps in the exact center of a bed on the lake side of the city, a border dispute between two women who no longer dispute the border, on a gray scarf that has now outlived 4 apartments, 2 cities, 7 wasted years and 1 spectacularly effective cardiac event. And every night one of us counts his breathing out of ceremony, and every night the number is a number 2 people can live with. This January, the email from the venue arrived on schedule, the way it had arrived every January for 7 years to an inbox that never unsubscribed. She did not mention it. I found out because she left her laptop open on the kitchen table, which Imogen Rain has never once done by accident in her entire documented life, and on the screen was the email, and below the email was her reply, drafted, unsent, cursor blinking, 3 lines long, and the first line said, writing to ask whether the credit is transferable to a new booking, and whether you have availability in the autumn, when the light on the water is best. I stood there for a long time. Then I sat down, and pulled the laptop over, and added 1 line to the draft in my own voice, and hit send, and went to find her. She was in the window with the cat, and the heron and her coffee, and she did not turn around. And her shoulders were doing the thing they do when the composure is holding on purpose, for ceremony, one last time, and I put my chin on the top of her head, and told her what I had added, which was this. October, if you have it. We have been 7 years short, and we are done counting. The photographer, we have agreed, will be someone else. I intend to be extremely present. I walked into the vet crying with my dying cat, and the vet was the woman I walked out on. That is the true version. Here is the truer one. I walked into that building carrying everything I had ever broken in one plastic box, and the woman I had broken it against kept her hands steady and saved what could be saved, and then, on her own time, at her own rate, in her own handwriting, saved the rest. These days I read her name on the door on the way in. Every time. Twice.